Alright folks, here you can see that I am in a stock of river cane. This is the local variety that we have here in Southern California. I'm not really sure exactly of the scientific name for this type of river cane, but you want to cut a few pieces, and in this other image, in this other image, you're going to see that I start processing the river cane. Specifically, I start removing some of the material near the nodes. The nodes are the joints that you get in the river cane that separate each of the straight pieces from each other. So the nodes, you don't want to get too much material off of them. Specifically with this type of river cane, I do not remove the walls because it's not that thick to begin with. There's different types of river cane. The one on the eastern side of the US, you do want to remove some of that material in the walls because it's thicker, it's stronger, and so it doesn't matter as much. I would say. Next, you can see me here. I started applying some heat to the areas where the shaft was crooked. So to begin with, I start straightening the center of the river cane, not the node area, but the center. And then after I straighten the center as much as I can, I go back into the node areas and I straighten those out. The reason why I don't do it all at once, like I don't go through the shaft from one section to the next, so like from the main area to the node, is because it's quite hot, so it's kind of hard to handle when you just heat the whole thing up. So I separate the sections and I try to stay away from the hot sections so I can grab the shaft and make sure that I can bend it and straighten it out. You want to straighten the shaft twice. This is when I cut after cutting the shaft. This is the night after cutting the shaft, so it was fairly green. So you want to do your first bit of straightening then, and then after you start making the arrow, you want to do a second straightening and even a third straightening if you need to, but generally I do it twice and they end up pretty good. The hardest parts are generally around the node areas, or if you have it near the ends. That's why you want to leave your shafts fairly long and then cut them down. Once you straighten the shaft, as you can see here, I start sanding the ends. On one of the ends, specifically on this shaft, on these cane arrows, what I did was I narrowed down the end. As you can see, that's what I'm doing. I got 60 grit sandpaper here, and you want to just spin the shaft as you sand, and that narrows the end of the shaft. And then after that, you're gonna want to cut with a saw. Want to cut some grooves, and what that'll do is, because so the diameter of these shafts that you want to cut is about 3/8 of an inch. That's the size that I like. It depends obviously on the cane. There's some cane that's stronger, so you can go a little bit thinner, but I like 3/8 of an inch. I also sand the node area just so I can get a smooth transition, and I do 60 grit sandpaper. Then I move down to those sanding blocks that you see there. I believe that one was like 150 grit, and then I have another block that's about 220, and that's where I'm cutting the end of the shaft. And what that'll do is, once I apply the sinew over that, it's going to close the shaft slightly, and that's gonna just get a tighter fit around the foreshaft that I'm going to insert. So on these arrows I use foreshafts, and I've seen people just plug them up and use them like that too, and that'll work, but I just like using the foreshaft. On one of the ends I'm plugging the shaft, and that's because that's the groove for the arrow, for the bowstring. So I'm gonna insert a piece of wood. You can insert whatever type of wood you want. I'm just using a whitewood here, but if you do something like Osage, it looks real fancy, or something like walnut looks real nice too. This is the foreshaft that I'm working on now, and pretty much I'm using just a rasp to get it down to shape. So I use a rasp, a sharp knife, and sometimes I use the belt sander. Here I am processing some back sinew, just getting some pieces of back sinew so I can go ahead and wrap that around the foreshaft. I apply some glue. I just apply some wood glue around the shaft, then I go ahead and wrap the sinew around that, and I generally go about 2 inches. I like going 2 inches. That'll keep the shaft nice and strong near the end, and it won't split or it won't break. My foreshaft pieces are also about 3/8 of an inch. That's how thick I like to leave them. So what I generally do is I process that shaft. I'm using hazel in these particular shafts. I love using hazel. I start off with like a 1/2 inch diameter hazel shoot, and then I reduce it using the plane, a small plane. I have like a 1-inch block plane, and that's how I reduce the hazel foreshafts. And then I just cut. These ones were about 8 inches in length, the foreshaft, and so the total length of this arrow was gonna be about 29 inches, almost 30 inches, 29 and a half. And I insert about 2 inches of the foreshaft into the cane shaft. Now here, what I do is I just reduce the tip of the shaft. And the reason I'm doing that is because on many of the shafts that I see, or the examples that I see on the books, they are actually tapered down, because you gotta add a tip. You obviously, if you add a tip like a stone point, you want to have that transition. Here I'm cutting the bowstring notch to accept the bowstring here on the end. And so what I do is I cut it with the saw first, and then I go over it with sandpaper, the 60 grit paper that you saw me use earlier. I use that, and I insert one end of the paper first, and as it removes material, I just insert both sides of it, and it pretty much gets me until I get to where I want. So you just keep doing that, and like I said, insert both now. That makes it wider, and then if I need it even wider, I just insert that end that you see there, and it works. And then you have different designs depending on the tribe that you're replicating. These arrows were Apache style arrows that I was replicating, not necessarily with the feathers, but I really like the look of these feathers. I actually saw Jack Crafty. He has a YouTube channel. It's a gentleman. He also makes bows, arrows, and he used these type of feathers, pheasant feathers, and I just love the way they look. And he's a great craftsman, so I took quite a bit of ideas from him. So I gotta give credit where credit is due, and that's where I saw some of these feathers being used, some of the techniques as well. But I'm here processing the feather, and so I split it first using a very sharp knife, and then I insert it in between two pieces of wood. I sand them with a sanding block, or you can also just use the sandpaper. I like using the sanding block, makes it easier. And you want to make sure that the feathers are nice and even and straight, so that when you lay them down on the shaft, they're not crooked, or they go on pretty straight, because if they are crooked, they may not fly well. So you want to make sure that you process those correctly. I'm just licking the feathers, the vein of the feathers. That is just to lengthen them a little bit. Make sure that if there's any moisture or humidity, they're not gonna lift up. You can also use water. It's easier for me to just lick them a little bit and then just apply some. I'm using glue here. You don't have to. You can just tie them on. I just like glue to make sure that they're secure, so I'm using some crazy glue or super glue. Just adding them there. So I'm adding 3 of them. I didn't record the way I shape the feathers once they're there, but pretty much I cut them down with the scissors. So I cut them down with the scissors and then I go over them. I heat a piece of I have a rasp or a file. I heat that up and then I just go over the feather and it gets it nice and straight. I burn the feather. So first I cut it and then I just burn it, and it makes it look very nice. Makes it look nicer than if you just cut it with the scissors. The scissors are not really. They're once you cut it, you'll see what I mean. Because if you're shaking a little bit, it's not gonna be perfect. Once you're using the fire, you can use a burning ember, and that'll burn the feathers too. But I like using a piece of steel, like a rasp or a file that's straight, and I just heat that up and apply the heat there to the feathers. But right here I'm just cutting I'm cutting the groove to accept the arrow point. The way I cut it, so your groove has to be perpendicular than your bowstring notch. So it has to be the opposite way. So perpendicular to your bowstring notch, and you should be good. So I'm showing you there, and I'm just letting you know that my bowstring notch is the other way. I use the same method here for opening up that groove. It really is going to come down to the arrow point that you're using. The arrow points that I was using, they're not perfect. I actually got them from they're agate points from India, but they're really hard. And they're not perfect, but I nap them a little bit to get them better. They actually look very nice once they're in there, and they're actually very sharp as well. I test a few different ones. This one, as you can see, didn't work out. It wasn't spinning right, so I used a different one. Also, the way you cut the groove, sometimes that will affect the placement of your arrow point. If you got perfect arrow points, then you can get away with you don't really have to be that precise, or you don't really have to modify too much. In this case I do have to modify them, but at the end of the day, what I want to make sure that it's spinning correctly, so that when I shoot it off the bow, it's not going to wobble or do anything funny. Here I am gonna go ahead and insert that point there at the end. I'm using a resin based glue, which I can just go ahead and heat, and it's very durable. It almost reminds me of pine pitch, the pine pitch that was used mixed with beeswax. In this case, this one obviously is going to be a lot stronger because it's synthetic, but I like using it. It has the feel of the natural stuff. Very simple. Once I insert my point, I go ahead and spin it. I'll spin it. You'll see me spin that, but make sure you use some pliers, that way you won't get burned. But you can use there's this type of glue. They sell it at Three Rivers Archery, and it comes in longer pieces. The ones I'm using are just pellets, but I'm spinning the arrow now, and it looks good, so I'm gonna keep it that way. All I do afterwards is add some sinew. So I just wrap some sinew, again about 1.5 to 2 inches on that arrow point. You can see I'm showing you there what I did. This is a finished arrow. To finish it up, I go ahead and I paint that. I paint the end as well as the nock, and then I'm just showing you that I paint it with a marker. I paint it section of black, and then I removed some lines from it with just a sharp knife. Spinning the arrow just to show you it spins very good, and pretty much that's it. Thank you for watching.